Greetings and welcome back to beautiful San Diego. Today we find ourselves trekking through the Asian Passage and we'll be reflecting back on some of the amazing animals that once called the San Diego Zoo home and the legacies they left behind. In 1938, San Diego built its first snow leopard exhibit, but it wouldn't be for another 11 years until 1949 when the zoo would actually become home to these beautiful and mysterious animals. With the announcement that the 2 snow leopard cubs would be coming to the zoo, it's no surprise that this became big news, for even back in the 1940s, these ghosts of the Himalayas were rarely seen in their native habitats and almost completely unheard of in zoos as well. Local papers ran headlines that followed the journey of these 2 leopards as they headed to California from India via the Atlantic. On January 21st of 1949, with much hype and celebration, snow leopards Tibet and a second cub finally arrived. It is also worth noting that this happened to be the same day San Diego received its first snowfall in 99 years. For a while after their arrival, reporting the headlines continued, with the papers describing these new animals' behaviors in their new home. Unfortunately, the second cub became sick and passed away. However, Tibet survived. Not only did he survive, he thrived in this new environment as well. Every effort by the zoo was made to give Tibet the best possible habitat to live in. Keepers learned a lot from this mysterious cat, and despite the stories and thoughts that such exotic animals would be almost impossible to keep at the time, one of the rarest of the big cats was found not only to be affectionate and docile, but very adaptable to new environments. In 1940, the San Diego Zoo introduced visitors to the attention-grabbing and very adorable lesser panda. These lovable animals from an exotic land would eventually thrive in San Diego. The original group of 4 arrived from Nepal, and it consisted of a male and 3 females. These charming and lovable white and flame orange animals, with their endless curiosity and uncanny good looks, would quickly grab the attention of zoo visitors. At the time of their arrival, lesser pandas were a rare sight within the United States and caused a sensation just like the snow leopards would a few years down the road. Upon arrival of the 4 at the zoo, director at the time, Belle Benchley, wrote, "We were all charmed with their beautiful coloring and cunning, friendly ways. The 4 little faces, with a mask so like that of our common raccoons, peered earnestly out toward the light, and when they saw the green leaves of bamboo, 8 little hands reached out and holding the leaves daintily, ate with evident satisfaction." The friendliest of the 4 happened to be a female named Loppy. In 1942, Loppy gave birth to a cub, and that sturdy, healthy youngster was the first of many annual increases in the local Red Panda population. In 1948, there were 5 Red Panda cubs born, and altogether the zoo had 30 births that were recorded between the years of 1941 and 1954. In 1987, as a gift from China, 2 female Szechuan Takins arrived at the zoo. With that, San Diego became the first zoo in North America to care for these animals. The following year, a male arrived, and in 1989, the first Szechuan Takin born outside of China occurred here as well. Around this time, the zoo also received a breeding pair of Mishmai Takins, and in May of 1993, a female calf was born, again the first of the species in the Western Hemisphere. This happened to be a surprise pregnancy, as the mother had been a year younger than the recorded breeding age of the species. As many were skeptical about her pregnancy, it caused quite the stir when she gave birth and drawed many people to take a look at this unexpected newcomer to the zoo. Keepers had decided that a suitable name would be one representing her status. They began their long search by looking for a Mandarin Chinese word for firstborn. Many calls were made. No one would believe they actually had a newborn Mishmi Takin. It is reported that some went as far as hanging up on them, thinking that this had been an elaborate prank call. Finally, a friend of the zoo from China suggested Su Sin R, and the little firstborn was officially named. This playful youngster would eventually be released into the main exhibit with her mother, and one of the first things she did was to climb down into the moat and become stuck, bleeding until keepers provided a series of stacked logs to give her something to climb. In 1987, for 100 days only, San Diego Zoo housed giant pandas. It wasn't until 9 years later, in September of 1996, did they receive Baiyun and Shishi for a long-term conservation and reproduction study of giant pandas. Baiyun became a major contributor to 19 years of giant panda research. She was a fantastic mother to all 6 of her cubs, with her first in 1999, which also happened to be the first surviving panda cub born in the United States. In 1928, a rowdy group of orangutans received some company with the arrival of sun bear cubs Topsy and Eva. At the time, the ringleader of the orangutans, Maggie, loved to tease these little bears. She would swing down to grab the young bears by their back legs and pull them away from their meals. Well, enough was enough, and one day Topsy would nip this behavior in the bud by nipping Maggie on the head. This newfound behavior by Topsy became so aggressive towards the orangutans that the sun bears were moved to other accommodations within the zoo. It was in this new home that they would play and romp about and eventually become expert beggars, where they earned themselves enough goodies from visitors, referred to in a very early issue of Zoo News as those fat little black bears from Malay. In 1941, Topsy would leave another mark in San Diego Zoo history as she gave birth to the zoo's first surviving sun bear cub. Topsy would determine the cub's public debut the first day that the cub had emerged from the den. Visitors were thrilled and had lined up at the exhibit to see this debut. Not the sassy Topsy. Not only was she not thrilled, she took her cub back inside the den, and that's where it stayed until she saw fit to bring it back out. In 1942, she gave birth a second time. With that birth brought attention and accolades for the reproduction of a species so rarely seen in U.S. zoos. On December 29th of 1965, 10-month-old sun bear Boo Boo took up residence in the children's zoo. This bear already had some bragging rights, as being the only female and bear to serve on active duty with the Seabees. This lovable and adorable discharged war veteran had received a letter of accommodation from her tireless dedication to bringing joy to her battalion. This 3-month-old cub had been parachuted to the construction group during a routine aerial supply of the battalion in Chu Lai, Vietnam. Here's where Boo Boo began her distinguished military career. Her duties, which by the way she excelled at, included climbing trees, running along the beach with men, wrestling, eating their popcorn, occasionally standing sentry duty, and according to the battalion, getting into lots of mischief. When it was time for the battalion to return to California, she returned with them. Once stateside, Boo Boo's brothers-in-arms wrote a letter to the San Diego Zoo asking if the bear could be provided a good home there. The zoo agreed. There was an official party upon her arrival at the zoo, and she even eventually shared a habitat with sun bears Josephine and Boy Sun Bear. In 1938, the first 3 Andean bears arrived at the San Diego Zoo as part of the Hancock Pacific Scientific Expedition. These 3 were named Polly, Toby, and Punch. At the time, there were only 2 other Andean bears in human care. One of these original 3 lived until 1958, establishing a record of over 20 years for the species. In 1986, 2 young Andean bears arrived at the zoo. The little female found a very small opening, thought by many to be too small for a pair to get through, in the top corner of her indoor area. I think we can see where this is going. To prove that thought wrong, she was able to climb out of the small opening and proceeded to run down the sidewalk and jump into the pond, which happened to be the home of Charlie, a 2,000-pound sea lion. They say maybe it was from the shock of the encounter, but neither one reacted to each other, and staff easily returned her back to her own home. This was her only escape, but she soon earned the name Miss Houdini. In 1990, she became one, if not the youngest Andean bear to give birth at a zoo. Much too inexperienced in motherhood to care or keep the cub warm, the cub was taken to an area where the staff cared for newborns. Since he was cold as a cucumber when he was found, the staff gave him the name Pepino, which is Spanish for cucumber. Later, Miss Houdini would become a great mother, balancing the fine art and nurturing with discipline, and like any other mother, a bit of scolding. The keepers enjoyed watching her very meticulous building of nest, often providing extra bedding to make sure that there was enough for her mate Tommy when she was finished gathering what she wanted. Onlookers enjoyed watching her build her nest, especially when she would build them at the top of an exhibit log, where Miss Houdini would jump up and down on the nesting material to get it just right. In 1917, at 2 years of age, the zoo received its first brown bear named Caesar. Even though this brown bear was a female, it became quickly apparent to zoo staff how she received this name. She previously had been living as a mascot aboard a naval ship, and things had been mainly fine up to a point. Then one day she went on a rampage, running up and down the ship corridors, knocking sailors down and out of her way, which happened to include the captain. And at this time, the crew agreed and decided that maybe she had grown a little too big for the ship and possibly too strong for them to handle properly, and the decision was made to donate her to the San Diego Zoo. Dr. Harry Wega IV opened the first open-air grotto exhibit in a U.S. zoo in 1923, which featured a polar bear, black bear, and of course Caesar. Each of these bears occupied a different area of the habitat with wire dividers between them. With its completion, the bears were led into this new exhibit where they explored and sniffed the hard-packed dirt. They were watched by staff to make sure everything would be okay and good to go, and all seemed well. So the staff, happy with the new exhibit, headed home for the night. However, the next morning, they were in for a surprise and a shock. Upon arriving, they found an enormous tunnel, which was described as big enough to drive a small truck into, had been dug into the rock-hard dirt floor of Caesar's home, creating a huge pile of rubble in the process. Not only that, she was standing on top of it and making the acquaintance of the polar bear. Everyone on the team was dumbfounded by what Caesar had managed to achieve by herself overnight. It was even described by them as something heavy equipment and dynamite couldn't have done. That day, the bears were taken off exhibit and placed in their bedrooms, and the staff set to work filling the hole. It took 3 days to fix what Caesar had done in one night. This time, concrete was added to the floor to keep her from doing this again. She was another bear that had perfected the fine art of begging, sitting on her rump and holding both back feet with her front paws, waiting and wanting guests to toss peanuts and candy into her lap. During her 19 years at the zoo, Caesar was always the dominant bear in the group she was placed with, and others learned not to mess with her. Zoo director Bell Benchley called her the tyrant, but this was said with much respect and affection that all staff members held for this very remarkable bear. She passed away in 1936. In 1970, a 5-month-old orphan cub named Chester arrived at the zoo. Chester was discovered by some guests during visits to the zoo, and many others knew of him before ever having stepped foot on zoo grounds. They had seen him in action through photos and home movies. He was a very popular bear and had been photographed millions of times over the years. Zoo buses would pull up to his grotto, where they were often met with Chester, who would try to coax a bear biscuit from the driver by putting on a show. First, he would wave his right paw, then he would wave his left, rub his stomach, and rise onto his hind legs to his full height of 10 feet. Chester was an Alaskan peninsular brown bear. He displayed cleverness and lots of charisma during his 15 years at the zoo, which were as impressive as his large size. Chester's main keeper, Jim Joyner, said he was the most intelligent animal he had ever worked with. On April 15th of 1953, 3 sloth bear cubs arrived at the Children's Zoo, named for a popular children's poem, Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod. They were in tough competition for the title of the cutest. Zoo News reported that active and very agile Winkin' was the dancer of the group and could win a jitter, but the contest was very easy as the other 2 would not dance. Blinkin' had taken the role of playing the big bad wolf, trying to knock everything down or over and failing at these efforts. Nod was said to be the sensitive one and showed apparent chagrin about his dirty feet. The little cub would hold up a paw to show the visitors. while covering his eyes with a front paw and hanging his head. As the bears grew out of their home in the children's zoo, they relocated to a new exhibit in Bear Canyon. And on December 15, 1958, Wink and a Nod's first cub arrived, which marked the zoo's first successful birth of a sloth bear cub. So there was just a handful of some of the unique stories of some of the amazing animals that have called the San Diego Zoo home. Not only did these magnificent animals keep us entertained, but more importantly, we were taught by them. We learned about their unique behaviors and how to take care of them in the wild. Thank you for joining me on this trek through the Asian Passage at the San Diego Zoo. This is Brad, and I will see you where our adventures take us next. Until next time, safe travels, everyone.